Yo, Grolo here. CIG recently put out a couple of design briefs on the medical gameplay coming in patch 4.3.1 and beyond. One of the briefs is focused on what we're going to be getting in 4.3.1, and one of them is what's coming after, kind of a roadmap per se. So I wanted to take a look at these together because there's some pretty interesting stuff in here. Now, the 4.3.1 brief, design brief medical gameplay that they put out, there's a lot of recap information here. Things that, if you've been around Star Citizen for a while or paid attention to the last Citizen Con or some of the Inside Star Citizen shows since then, a lot of this will be repeat information, stuff that you're already familiar with. They've gone into, the injury system here, which talks about the Tier 1 through Tier 3 injuries available to us in Star Citizen. Which I want to comment that, this is pretty cool stuff, right? In a lot of MMOs and other games, even survival games that I've played or whatever, the way that you received damage or debilitating effects and recovered from them were always quite simplistic. And I think if you look through this and just kind of take a step back and remind yourself of where this game's at, it's a testament to how well Star Citizen brings fidelity to systems that we've kind of been in and around and gotten used to over a long period of time. Just looking at the tier 3 injury list, right, to arms, legs, torso, heads, you'll find that there's different statuses and debuffs associated with taking damage to each of these things, right? If you get a tier 3, which is the least, is very confusing to me. I even mentioned this on one of the recent talks they gave where most of the systems in Star Citizen, tier 3 is the more advanced thing than the tier 1, but in medical it's reversed, so whatever. Tier 3 is the least minor injury that you can receive, and they talk about, if you take a tier 3 injury to your arm, it's going to have, some effect on your ability to aim, those types of things, whereas your leg, it's going to reduce your movement speed, and you'll be hobbling a little bit. Torso is going to reduce your ability to spend stamina or how much stamina you have, and head could actually affect your vision and stuff on the screen. Now, other games have these types of debuffs and whatever you want to call them. I remember raiding in World of Warcraft, and you would get bitten by certain spiders that would deliver a poison that would blur your vision. They also used the same effect if you drank too much in that game. So it's not like any game, no other games ever had debuffs like this. But kind of the way that Star Citizen stitches it together here, with location-aware damage, I think is a pretty cool aspect of the game. And they also support tiers, right? So you go from your tier 3 minor injury to your more advanced tier 2 moderate and then up through severe. And by the time you get to severe, things have taken a pretty drastic turn for the worse, right? A severe tier 1 injury to your legs, you're basically prone, you're crawling around. Arms, you can't use your weapon at all anymore. And so on and so forth, right? The torso, head, all equally bad. And then the way they weave that into the medical gameplay, where they talk here about the on-site treatments, players kind of doing what they need to do to get you into a steady state, I think is pretty well done, especially whenever they start talking about the drugs that are used to stabilize players. Which honestly, I never really dug into this too much, so I didn't even know what all these different drugs were for. It wasn't until they put out this design brief that I kind of refreshed myself. I think a long time ago I might have looked at this and then just kind of dismissed it because I was never much for the medical gameplay myself. That doesn't mean it's not well done and interesting. Each of these drugs has a purpose. The Stratogen here is used for, injuries to your respiratory and cardiac and chest systems. The Raxaphin or whatever, however you pronounce it, is for more of the mobility debuffs on your arms and your legs, and so on and so forth. They got stuff for fatigue, concussions, which I assume is head trauma, and even stuff to mitigate, because one of the cool things they have here is as these drugs are administered to you, your BDL or your blood drug level goes up. They talk about this up here, right? And so there's even, where was that? Yeah, right here, this little status. It's another debuff or status or on your screen that you'll see. But as that goes up, you might need a separate drug to produce that. So it's a level. It's not like super rocket science here, but it's kind of like the same level of fidelity that it brought into other systems, right? Like if you look at mining in Star Citizen and the fact that you need to wield that laser well, you need to watch the meters and not make sure that you're not putting too much power into a rock, and then the managing of the things that you're extracting out of the ground and loading them in the boxes. I mean, that's just the overall fidelity around that is so much more than something like World of Warcraft or even Ashes of Creation or even EVE Online, which has a very sophisticated structure around resource gathering. But the act of mining itself in EVE Online is basically clicking a button and waiting, right? You click a button, your ship's orbiting a rock, and you're just extracting stuff. All of the kind of fanciness and thoughtful ingenuity that goes into extracting resources from that rock in the game like EVE Online happens before you ever get to the rock. It's all how you've invested in your skills, how you've configured your ship, blah, blah, blah. But once you actually arrive on the scene, you basically just click a button and wait, unless you're unlucky enough to be sabotaged by NPCs or other players. Same thing in World of Warcraft, right? You want to go mining in World of Warcraft, you right-click a rock and you wait. You want to go mining in Ashes of Creation, which is a very modern MMO, but it's the same system. You go up and you hit your interact key with the rock and you wait. And at the end, it rolls the dice and you get to see what rarity you pick. So it's a little more interesting than World of Warcraft, but not much. So just as Star Citizen is bringing a little more fidelity to the operations of like mining, it's also doing it here, right? Like if you consider how Star Citizen is approaching medical gameplay versus other survival games or other MMOs. World of Warcraft, you take damage, health meter goes down, you drink healing potion or apply a band-aid, health bar goes up, right? That's all there is to it. Unless you're actively participating in combat, and of course then healers are casting heal spells. But again, it's just about that bar going up and down. Same thing with the survival games, Dune Awakening, Conan Exiles, others that I've played. It's really just a matter of applying a bandage to recover a hit point pool. And there's certainly some of that in Star Citizen. That's what the red med pen is for, right? Recovering your... but these other debuffs and so forth, I think it integrates in a way that makes sense, and it brings life into the system, much like these other systems that I'm talking about. So this is pretty cool. Of course, rescue beacons, which we lost back in 4.0. Work on them is resuming. I guess we're going to be getting those back. I'll talk about that more in a bit. They go into the differences of medical beds. They discussed this all quite a while ago. I think it was with whenever the NERSA came out, right? The medical URSA. That's the patch where they introduced the changes for the Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, and the ability to respawn directly on these medical beds, and they all had ranges, so there's not a whole lot new here, but this is where they get into the med gel, right? That's one of the things we're going to be getting in a 4.3.1 patch, which is going to change things significantly. So now these medical beds that are on our ships or our ground vehicles or whatever, they're not going to operate without med gel. So we're going to have some kind of a stockpile on the ship, and I think this is really cool. This is definitely a step in the right direction. Again, which I'll talk about more in a bit. I felt that the Tier 0 implementation of item recovery was such a step backwards in some ways when it came to respawning, but again, more of that in a bit. So we're moving back in the proper direction here, where now there's going to be a cost associated with using these medical beds, whether you're using them to heal a wound, like one of those Tier 3, 2, 1 injuries we just talked about, or if you're going to be actually respawning on the bed, there's going to be a cost associated with all that. And so they talk here about how much med gel a bed can hold. So here they're saying a Tier 1 med bed, which is going to be the one with the largest respawn distance, also capable of healing Tier 1 injuries, right? Like, they correspond that, so that, if you have a Tier 2 injury, you need at least a Tier 2 bed to treat it. Tier 1, so on and so forth. So a Tier 1 med bed is going to be able to hold 400 SCU of med gel or CSCU of med gel inside the bed. And then down below here, and then tier 3 is 100, tier 2 is 200, etc. Now down below that, they give us a cool image of what it's going to look like to reload the med gel into a bed. Cool, thumbs up. Then they talk about the cost of using the bed. So healing injuries, it looks like regardless of what level med bed you are using or what class of injury you're healing, it's always 50 CSCU of med gel. So that's fine. Nice, simple. And then respawning on the bed is going to be 100. So just with what the med beds can stock internally, it looks like you'll get 1 respawn, right, out of a tier 3 med bed. You'll get 2 respawns out of a tier 2, and you'll get 4 respawns out of a tier 1. And then you'll get twice that on injury repair. So, you know, a tier 3 med bed will be able to heal 2 minor injuries before you need to reload it. Tier 2 will be able to do 4 minor injuries, and tier 1 will be able to do, 8? I'm sorry, minor or moderate in the tier 2, and then 8 injury repairs on the tier 1 med bed. So that's minor, moderate, or severe injuries. So that seems like a fair first pass at balancing this. Now, these are all just numbers, and the nice thing about numbers is they're easy to tweak. So as they get feedback on this, make sure they hear it, whatever your feedback is. As we deliver feedback, those types of numbers I'm not really concerned about. These things are easy to tweak. I'm not really going to comment too much on those. But I think overall it's a sane, reasonable sounding system, and I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be one more thing that you want to make sure is stocked on your ship. If you're flying a ship with medical facilities, you're going to want to definitely be loading some med gel containers in there so that you can reload these med beds as they are exhausted. And of course, this design brief goes into ships of the trade. They talk about, you know, what type of med beds are offered by the Apollo Medevac, which obviously they want to sell in 4.3.1, and then the existing ships that we have, the Terrapin, the Cutlass Red, the C.I.G, and the Nursa, which kicked all this off in a way. So obviously the of those ships, the Apollo Medevac is the only one to offer tier 1 medical beds. Surprise, surprise. The rest are all tier 2 or less. Although I think there might be some tier 1s out there on non-medical ships. At least the Origin, 890 Jump, I think, that's tier 1. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then they go into other things that offer these beds that follow different rules, the clinics, the hospitals, blah, blah, blah. Cool. Now, the even more interesting thing to me was the next thing that they released alongside of this, which was an article talking about life and death and life again beyond 4.3.1. Now, this is where they get into some of the more things that we're not going to be seeing in 4.3.1, but things that are coming, things that they're working on. So it's cool that they put this out. And again, if you've been around a while, you know that there are much older articles that predate this stuff that have been talking about these systems being in eventuality for quite some time. On the whole way back to the Death of the Spaceman article put out by CR and others. Like, I think there's a lot of consternation in the community around Death of a Spaceman and the various viewpoints on it. I, for one, am pro Death of a Spaceman. Just FYI, I can't wait to see this in action. And then there's been other articles that talk about the stuff that you know, they got the healing and medical treatment guide on the in-game assistance and the documentation sites they put out. So check that out. But the very first thing in the introduction section of this article that they talk about is medical gameplay, like other systems within the Star Citizen universe, such as mining and salvage, which we just talked about, is not a standalone endeavor within the overall development of the project. It is inexorably and essentially linked with several other systems, like the actor status system, scanning, FPS travel, beacons, and more. Because of this, forward development is often dependent on outstanding work to related systems first, and it can often seem like this vital and important aspect of our intended Star Citizen experience has taken a backseat to other flashier systems. This unfortunate reality was compounded earlier this year with the release of server meshing, which had an adverse effect on beacons, which were not and still have not been fully updated and converted to the multiple star system reality of 600 players we have today. And while Alpha 4.3.1 brings several new aspects to medical beds, restores some of the recently lost beacon functionality, we wanted to take this opportunity to explore the intended future for regeneration beyond Alpha 4.3.1. This is not the comprehensive death of a spaceman we're still driving towards. Thank you. But it's a brief exploration of some of the changes and additions we'll encounter. All right, so +1 to this stuff. I think, it's just the nature of the beast. When you're developing a system this big, and when I say system in that sense, I'm talking about the Star Citizen universe as a whole. There's so many smaller systems within that are just so coupled and dependent upon one another. As a systems guy myself, like, I fully appreciate this fact, and like I can empathize and relate to what they're saying here. But I also understand that from the outside looking in, it always seems a lot simpler and frustrating as a side effect than it is. One of the systems in particular that is very much linked to the medical gameplay that's discussed in these documents, which I hinted at earlier, is the item recovery system, right? And whenever they introduced Tier 0 of item recovery, in a lot of ways, that in itself was a temporary death knell to the medical gameplay in Star Citizen, in my opinion, because if there's no cost respawning, and respawning on a local medical bed is as easy as just binding myself to it, parking the ship close, backspacing, boom, I'm back. I can easily run back out, pick up what was in my backpack. Who is going to send out a medical beacon in that world? Unless you just come completely ill-prepared, in which case, again, in most cases, it's not that big of a deal to lose what was in your backpack. It's not like replacing that stuff with in-game currency has that much cost associated with it today. So in a lot of ways, I don't know that we've really missed medical gameplay, because even if it existed alongside of item recovery Tier 0, I, for one, don't know that it would have actually been used that often. I would love to hear from you if you disagree, or you think that medical gameplay, such as beacons, would have had much of a purpose alongside item recovery Tier 0. Let me know. So, the fact that they are shipping changes to the medical system and working on item recovery Tier 1 in the background, which we talked about the monthly report last week, right? And in the core gameplay section, they were talking about things that they were working on related to item recovery that would be required for Tier 1. So we know they're working on the Tier 1 stuff in the background. How soon that's coming, we don't know for sure, but it's just an example of two systems within the system that are very inexorably linked, as they put it. And after that, they start to get into some of the future visions here, and I thought this was pretty cool, so I went to take a look at it with you. They developed some flowcharts here for the healing health injury system. They talk about the ability to bind to multiple beds at once. I'm so bummed we're not going to see this in 4.3.1. This is something that I know me and my org have been looking forward to for quite some time. Never knowing if it was actually coming, so this is confirmation that we're definitely getting this, right? So today, it's kind of risky. Like, say your entire org is staging on, like, I don't know, Hurla 1. And that's kind of like the headquarters for your operations or whatever. So everybody's bound to Hurla 1, and you are embarking on some Onyx facility adventure, and you're going to go down there, and somebody's flying a Carrack, which has medical facilities on it, and the idea is that everybody binds to the Carrack in case there's a mishap on the planet. It's actually risky in the current implementation to do that, right? Because if the Carrack is lost, instead of respawning back on her L1, which everybody was bound to previously, in the current state of the game, everybody's going to go to whatever planet they picked as their starting planet at character creation time. And this has definitely bitten us more than once, where the ship everybody has bound to had, and not always to any fault of our own, right? It's the state of the game. Like, things happen, bugs happen, people have to backspace to get out of sticky situations, ships get lost because of stupid stuff happening. But now, player recovery during the mission suffers greatly because anybody who bound to that Carrack, in this example, and dies is now going back to Microtech or Area 18 or wherever where they would bound their stuff. So this will definitely be a huge boon for binding yourself to a ship with less risk, because what they've described here is that you'll basically be able to have a fallback, so that if I start on Area 18 and I later bind myself to her L1, and then on a mission I bind myself to the ship's medical bed, and something happens to that ship, my respawn will actually fall back to her L1 instead of going the whole way back to my home station. So, and they talk about it's actually being a choice, right? Well, we're going to continue on here because they give some visuals for this. So this first flow chart, they outline, healing health injuries, players injured, goes to medbed. Does the medbed have conditions? If not, it heals the player, blah, blah, blah. If it does have conditions, it checks to see whether those conditions are met. If they're not, it does not heal the player, otherwise it does. And the same thing for regeneration, basically. With the addition of, they make sure that the regeneration is at that location is valid based on a bunch of conditions, and if not, they have to pick another location. So then they talk about, here's where they talk about the multiple imprints at once. They talk about the ability to have a landing zone, which I take it is either a planet or a station, a ship or vehicle imprint, a home base, which is interesting. That ties into the base building and crafting system, which is another system that is going to intersect with medical gameplay, and temporary, which is interesting. That's going to be bindings to events. They talk about POIs like Stormbreaker, right? So that would be definitely temporary things. Now, the conditions they get into here are things like, is the bed out of medgel, which we just talked about. Does medgel even apply to the bed? It's not going to apply to hospitals and stuff on planets or stations, right? Is it a temporary imprint? And if so, is the timing proper? And a whole host of other conditions that are going to be checked here. Is it enabled or disabled by an event? Who knows what all events could be? Could be part of a mission like Stormbreaker, or it could be maybe when you're going through a wormhole, med beds are disabled. Who knows? It could be all kinds of things. Distortion, they mentioned here, is something that could disable med beds. That's super interesting. That could really change the mechanics of assaulting a capital ship and preventing the occupants of the capital ship that you're assaulting from respawning if you can shut down stuff through distortion. So that's interesting. Distance, obviously. And fees. They talk about the ability to assign fees for respawning, so that's interesting. And permissions in general, like down here they mentioned medbed permissions, where you can assign who can respawn at your medbed. I think this will be the first. I mean, if permissions arrive on medbeds sooner than base building arrives on the scene, then that would make it one of the first things in the game that I know of that permissions can even be assigned to. And I know we've all been waiting for quite some time with bated breath for some kind of permissioning system to arrive. And as I was playing Dune Awakening recently, it kept reminding me of how badly I can't wait for this to arrive in Star Citizen. But again, before we get base building, it's not going to be that impactful. So, but again, the ability to assign, the ability to respawn to just you, everyone, public, friends, party members, org members, that all makes sense. The everyone would be interesting, especially with combined with fees, giving some kind of public service to people for a price. Will definitely be cool. I would expect to see a lot of that going on. Although risky, perhaps. And then, yeah, they give us a little mock-up here of changes to the regeneration interface. Everybody knows what the regeneration interface looks like today. Whenever you're incapacitated, you're knocked down or whatever, it's basically a mostly black screen with the incapacitated text, as they call it here. You know, down in the corner, you'll see how long you have until you're dead, and people can't pick you up. So it looks like they're going to be bringing a lot more life to this screen. The chat is still going to be accessible, which it is not today. I don't know how I feel about that, honestly. I've played quite a few MMOs where you can't chat when you're dead. Kind of makes sense, but I can also see it the other way. I don't really feel strongly on that one. But then the regeneration choice that they talked about being along the bottom of the screen here. So when you're dead, instead of the very bottom of the screen being the incapacitated text, you're now going to have all the respawn options at your disposal. You can choose right there to respawn at the hospital, the last vehicle you imprinted at, your base. Once we get base building, the temporary thing which we mentioned associated with events or quests, or put out a medical beacon. So I still can't help but feel like with all of these options at our disposal that medical beacons will be that popular of a choice. What do you think? It's just, if I can choose to spawn at my last vehicle, and even with MedGel coming into the equation, like there's just so much redundancy here. Yeah, I don't know. I still cannot see myself putting out a medical beacon until maybe the final incarnation of item recovery is online. But even then, it just seems to me like medical beacon gameplay will come down to people that just approach things wholly unprepared. But if you're going out as an org and you are well prepared and you have local respawn facilities, you've done the right thing, and you've also set a respawn at a local station and so on and so forth, it feels to me like, yeah, I don't know. I can't see it, but I'll definitely withhold judgment on that until it happens. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. So, yeah, they just talk here about all the things that you see on the things. And this is something they mentioned on the other article, you know, the one that came, that they had, the design brief on medical gameplay. They mentioned about whenever beacons were removed with the advent of 4.0, they also weren't designed for the increased scale, and that I can see that. Like, when we did have medical beacon gameplay in the game, the population caps were around 100. So we're at 600 now, and they mentioned here that with the increased player capacity of 600 people, the existing notification system became unmanageable. Like, I could see that. I remember getting medical beacon alerts with 100 people with somewhat routinely. So if you multiply that by 6, these problems of scale are things that interest me, of course. I can see how that would become unmanageable. And then, of course, with the addition of more star systems coming, and, you know, I know they're doing more and more testing of larger player accounts. Dynamic server meshing is still being worked on, as they validated in the last monthly report. So this issue of scale is only going to continue to get worse. So it says here, with both factors, a better way of finding and sorting them is needed. Additionally, we need several UI improvements, including a way for first responders to see the last several medical beacons a player has sent to better judge the likelihood of an ambush. I think that's a great addition. That was always another thing that prevented players from engaging in medical gameplay, because they were just such a common tool for ambushing. So it's I'm looking forward to any and all counter gameplay, or counter espionage, counter sabotage, all that kind of stuff. Just so, you know, we can, as players, we can maintain that cat and mouse game ourselves. And then, of course, while we can provide no dates or estimates for when these fixes or additions will arrive, we want to acknowledge that we're aware of the issue and reiterate our intention to address these issues on our road to 1.0. So, makes sense. We don't know how soon this stuff's arriving, but this is stuff they're thinking about. As far as medical beacons, it seems to me like just obvious first step is removing it from the main HUD. Most players are not going to care that medical beacons are going online. So tucking that away into the contract system, maybe some ingenuity there around the refreshed UI coming someday for that. Yeah. It would also be interesting if we could get, like, UIs on medical ships. That would be, you know, as we're going to have engineering consoles and stuff on all of our ships, it would be cool if things like the Apollo Medevac or Terrapin or Cutlass Red, if they had medical specific computers, it would give users on board the ability to tap in to medical beacon reports and stuff. Almost like the Explorer ships have those cool, you know, system maps that are completely unusable right now, but someday maybe. Something like that in our medical variant ships would be interesting to kind of locate these beacons in space and plot, compare and contrast, you know, rewards being offered. You know, I could see almost like a market. Obviously, you know, market systems are coming at some point where you'll be able to go through and compare and contrast prices across different economies based on the type of equipment at your disposal. If something like that for medical gameplay, almost like a market for rejuvenation, would be pretty fascinating. So it'll be interesting to see what they come up with there. What about you? You have any ideas on how they could improve the UI and user experience of either side, the person in need of help or the first responders? I'd be curious. This stuff's fascinating to me. Anyway, that's all I have. I just wanted to take a look, because I just became aware of these articles or these briefs myself, and I figured if I was going to spend time looking at them, I might as well do it with you all. So anyway, I'd love to continue this conversation in the comments below, as always. If you're looking to come game with me and a lot of people better than me, visit unhinged.gg, and we'll see you in the Discord. Until then, Grolo out.